Hello everyone, welcome back to WhiskyWars. These are the 6 whiskies that I regret buying the most. So learn from my mistakes and hopefully you don't make the same mistakes yourselves. Now do let me know in the comments down below before we start, are there any whiskies that you regret buying? And if so, drop them in the comments down below. Now at number 6, I'm actually going to include a whiskey that I bought a few years ago now, but it's only at number 6 because of price. And I was still fairly new to the whiskey journey. Maybe I'd had around 50 bottles or so at the time. So I was still learning, and what I used to say all the time is, even if I buy a bad bottle, I'll learn from it. Because I'll pick up new flavours that I've not had before. Nowadays, that's not the case, and they firmly go down as a whiskey regret. So this is number 6. Now this is a whiskey that I really recommend that you don't get. I am going to pour a little bit of each whiskey and just to remind myself of how much I regret buying it. So starting off at number 6, we have the Hinch Peated Irish whiskey, bottled at 43%. Now as you can see, for a 3.5-year-old bottle-ish whiskey, it's not been drunk much, has it? That tells you something. Okay, let's see if it's opened up, because I've not had it for at least 18 months or so. No, it's still bad. Still bad. Maybe not as bad as I remember, to be fair. I'm glad this is at number 6. Salty. Very salty, but also a little bit sweet. It seems to be way less aggressive than when I first had it. I remember likening this to a chemical plant. It was just awful. Too aggressive. Very sharp, unusual flavours that just weren't nice at all. Having been open for 3.5 years, it has mellowed, and actually it is a better dram than what I had. So I'm glad it's at number 6 and it doesn't get into the top 5, but it's still not a whiskey that I would recommend at all. And also a whiskey that you'd have to open for 3 years. I'm not sure that's worth your money at all. Okay, in number 5, we have a whiskey that has a big name. It's a big Scotch whiskey distillery. My gripe with this whiskey was not the flavours, but it was the price of those flavours. Now this whiskey retails for £70 to £75 in the UK for a non-age stated whiskey, and that is the Oban Little Bay. So this whiskey, it's not a bad whiskey, but it is still number 5 on my whiskey regrets. Why is that? It's the price. It's the price. The taste of this whiskey, for me, if I paid £35 for this bottle, I'd look at it and go, yeah, okay, that's a decent whiskey, is that? It's good. I like it. Would I buy it again at that price? Maybe. The fact that this whiskey retails for double or even more than double that price is where I've got a problem with this whiskey. It's not overly complex. It is fairly simple. It's non-offensive, but it's not too interesting. For £70 to £75, this really was one of my whiskey regrets. But I do not regret buying that whiskey as much as I regret buying this whiskey, which was around £55, so it was cheaper, but it is not a good whiskey. And you can pay a few pounds more for the cask strength, which is significantly better. And that is a peated island scotch, the Mackmyra. Now this whiskey is bottled at 46%, but that does not save it at all. This whiskey lacks so many flavours. I've got my nose right in the glass and I'm barely picking up anything. Slightly peated, slightly sweet, but empty. I can't help but getting an empty note. There's also an ethanol note in there. It's sharp on the taste. I'm left thinking I've just had sharpness and emptiness, and yet I've paid £55 for this whiskey. Yeah. This is an interesting whiskey because you can pay a Talisker non-age stated whiskey, the Sky or the Storm, for £25. Half the price of this whiskey. The Letchik Riar cask, £32, £33. Even the 10-year-olds of both those distilleries are £35 to £40. This is a Naz for £50 to £55. I mean, yeah, this is not... This was a huge regret. I have to be honest. I've still not finished this bottle. I've had it for a couple of years now. The cask strength, like I say, it's a great whiskey. It's a few pounds more. £57, £58. Well worth it. This one, on the other hand, avoid this whiskey. This is just not good. Not good at all. So this was number 4 on my whiskey regrets. Which means there's still 3 more whiskies that I think I regret purchasing more than this one. And this is pretty high up. This is just not worth the money. The third whiskey that I regret buying the most, it's actually a new whiskey that I've recently bought. But I've got a big problem now. This was my favourite Irish distillery. This whiskey, the whiskies they produce, I just think are phenomenal. But I have recently been seeing, and this is a problem with Ardbeg too, their limited edition releases are getting worse and they're getting more expensive. I paid £80 for this whiskey, which makes it the second most expensive whiskey that I've ever bought. And I wish I could go back time and not buy this whiskey. Yeah, this was a big regret. The whiskey in itself is not terrible. It's drinkable. In fact, I'd say it's above average. But above average for £80 is ridiculous. They've recently released a new whiskey that's only available in Irish duty free. So it's an Irish whiskey. And it's had an even bigger price jump on this newer release. So I will not be buying that one at all. That's €110 now in duty free. This one I picked up for £80, so maybe around €95. In fact, in Ireland, this is more than €95. I'll just go ahead and show you this whiskey. And it's sad, it's a sad day. The Redbreast, a Redbreast makes this, which makes me sad. But it just shows you the state of whiskey in today's climate. This is the Redbreast Tawny Port finish whiskey. As I said, I don't need to try this one. I've had it recently. This is not a bad whiskey, but it is a very bad whiskey for the price. It's not worth the money. And this video is about not my worst whiskies, but my biggest whiskey regrets. To put £80 on this bottle of whiskey makes it a pretty big regret, I have to be honest. I think I have 7 different bottles of Redbreasts. This one is the worst one. And it's also the most expensive one. I paid more for this than I did the 15-year and the 12-year cask strength. 46% non-age stated. It was a really poor release, but it saddens me that the new one that's just come out a few days ago is even more expensive. So yeah, that's the Redbreast Tawny Port finish. So now we're down to my top 2 biggest whiskey regrets. Also a fairly recent purchase. This is a distillery that, to be fair, I don't think is as good as it is hyped up to be. But recently I have bought a couple of whiskies from this distillery and I've really enjoyed them. This, however, was not one of them. This whiskey retails for £75 in the UK. Luckily, I bought it for less than that, but still, it's a lot of money. I do not recommend you buy this whiskey. This is the Talisker Parlay edition. It's a limited edition whiskey, bottled at 48.6%, so stronger than the ordinary Talisker, finished in French oak barrels. I was stunned at how little flavour I got from this whiskey. It's the worst Talisker that I've tried. It's worse than the Sky and the Storm. And it's also the most expensive Talisker that I own. And I own, to be fair, 6 bottles of different Taliskers. Avoid this whiskey. Honestly, a little bit like the Mackmyra, but it's more expensive. You don't get much on there. And you're paying £75. It's just honestly, it's a little bit of a robbery. Yeah, this whiskey I really regretted buying. As soon as I opened it and tried it, I knew that I'd been stung. But this is not as bad as this next whiskey, which is my biggest whiskey regret. And some of you might know what this whiskey is, judging on a recent video that I posted. But I just cannot get into this whiskey. Now, this whiskey retails for around £75 as well. I did manage to buy it less at duty free. But as soon as I opened this whiskey, I knew that I regretted buying this one as well. It's another Irish whiskey from Middleton, a distillery I love. But this is the Blue Spot. Now this is 58.9%. So you're expecting a lot of flavour coming out. There's no excuses at that percentage not to give you flavour. Honestly, not much flavour. The Yellow Spot is cheaper, older, much more flavour. This one, really poor. It's just really, really poor. Yeah, this whiskey, I'm still annoyed that I bought this whiskey. But you know, in life you do make mistakes. You do buy things that you regret buying. These are my top 6 whiskies that I regret buying. Now, if you like this video, I did actually steal the idea from First Fill Whiskey. He did his top 5 whiskies that he regrets buying. I tried to do 5 to keep it the same, but there was actually 6. These are the whiskies that I regret buying the most. 75, 75, £80. Yeah, not good. These two actually suck though. This one's just a little bit above average. I hope that helps. I hope it was a little bit of fun. I know it's a fairly negative whiskey review to do, but I do think these reviews are important as well because they educate people and let people know what are my worst whiskies or what are the whiskies that I regret buying the most. And these are definitely the top 3. So if you like the video, please do click a like on the video, but don't forget to click that subscribe button down below. It really helps the channel to grow. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you all for the next Whiskey War.